Paul and Silas bound in jail, had no money for to go their bail. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. Paul and Silas began to shout. The jail door opened and they walked on out. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. Hold on, hold on. Keep your eyes on the prize, hold on. This song that emphasizes perseverance and determination was frequently used in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. The song, of course, references our first reading today from Acts. Paul and Silas, bound in jail, had no money for to go to their bail. Paul and Silas began to shout. The jail door opened, and they walked on out. Interestingly, in the story, they walked on out, but they didn't run on out, head to the hills, get the heck out of jail. They were free, but for some odd reason, they hung around. These guys who had caused trouble for the Romans had work to do right there in the prison. And I guess the troublemakers really weren't that problematic after all. Or they certainly were not fearful of the Romans. Now, what got these guys in the trouble in the first place? Well, they messed with the economy. The economy that was based on some people not being free. Paul and Silas came upon a slave girl who had the ability to predict the future. She had become a circus act, bringing to her owners a lot of money. She would perform on cue for her owners, earning a little money for herself and providing the owners with a big stash of cash. It was quite the little system, at least for the owners. When Paul and his buddies came through town, she was constantly yelling out, trying to get their attention. These men are slaves of the Most High God who proclaim to you a way of salvation. Well, for some reason, this really got on Paul's nerves. I don't know. Maybe he didn't like what she was saying. The Most High God sounds a lot like a title that might come from a pagan religion that viewed God not as a single entity, but a reality with many faces and forms. Maybe Paul was ticked off by her theology, or more likely, this slave girl just irritated him with her constant, non-stop babbling. Sometimes people with mental or psychological challenges, and you don't even have to have one of those, engage in repetitive behaviors that after a while just really get on our nerves, just wear us down. Very greatly annoyed, the text tells us, Paul ordered the spirit that possessed her to leave her. And you got to remember, this story comes from a world that viewed life in terms of powers and spirits. And Paul ordered the spirit to go. The spirit left her, and guess what? That really ticked off the owners. Paul and Silas had caused trouble for them, for their little economy. Their profits now were way down. The girl was free, but the owner's ability to make money off of her was eliminated. So the owners dragged Paul and Silas to the authorities, to the magistrates. These guys are disturbing our city, they said. They're messing with our common life. They're causing all kinds of trouble. Well, then the crowds join in the protest. When you mess with the economy, you get a big reaction, not simply by the owners, but by the folks who benefit from the current economic arrangements. You can mess with a lot of things, but just don't go unsettling the ways people make money. Some things aren't that important, but some things are, and money is one of those some things. Sometimes you got to keep people in slavery if you're going to make decent money. Sometimes slavery is necessary for the economy. Paul and Silas did some messing. They were engaged in what leaders of the civil rights movement, especially John Lewis, called good trouble. And this good trouble got them beaten with rods and thrown into the slammer. Now, to me, the most fascinating thing about this story is what happens at midnight. Paul and Silas have endured physical pain or bound with chains and now are singing Amazing Grace and what a friend we have in Jesus. They're praying and they're singing songs at midnight. Speaking of irritating behavior, I am sure that the fellow prisoners are just jamming with those tunes at midnight. Once again, Paul and Silas are causing some trouble, maybe some good trouble. Now, most of us, I know I would be cowering in fear. Most of us would recognize that the authorities have power over us and that we would do well just to keep our mouths shut, withdrawing into our little lament worlds. But no, Paul and Silas at midnight are singing praise songs. They know something bigger than that which they are experiencing. They are trusting something good in the midst of the trouble they are encountering and have brought upon themselves. Now, I got to tell you, when I was growing up, I didn't get in much trouble. I've gotten in more trouble later in my life than when I was a kid. I regret sometimes that I didn't cause more problems for my parents. I avoided trouble whenever I could. My sister, Patty, got in trouble all the time. She had the fair share of trouble for the family. I always wanted, and I married somebody like this too, I always wanted to behave. I got in trouble so seldom that I remember the couple of times when I did get in trouble. One was one time that I took the mail from our yard and took it over to Mindy Buttry's yard. Mindy was my 5-year-old girlfriend at the time, and she needed to see what our mail was. My mom was not the least bit pleased because, after all, the mail was a highlight for the day. I know some of you don't, especially graduates, you're not going to remember any of this, but in the mail, you got things like checks and bills and cards, and I know this one you're not going to know at all. We even got letters. But my mom thought Mindy didn't need to see those things, and so I got in trouble. I also got in trouble at our 4th of July family reunion. You see, I really liked homemade ice cream. I still do, by the way. If you want to invite me over, that's a good thing to have. And I knew that my grandfather kept it in the freezer that was amidst his collection of used batteries, spark plugs, rakes, nails, screws, and other things he hoarded. I brought with me a spoon, and I located the freezer and went for the ice cream, trusting that nobody would notice. I still do this once in a while. Don't tell my wife, all right? Trusting nobody would know that I had taken a scoop out of that ice cream. But who should enter the room when I was doing that but my grandfather, who hated, by the way, most people who were not like him, that is, white, Republican, and not a member of the Springfield Township Police. I got in trouble with him, and he spread the word that little Billy wasn't where he was supposed to be. That's about the only trouble I've ever caused. But the longer I live and deal with the Jesus story, I can't help but think that I need to get in more trouble. Honestly, it seems to me that to follow Jesus, you got to get into a little trouble, a good trouble. Now, by the way, and your parents are going to appreciate this, getting into bad trouble isn't helpful. You know, doing stupid things doesn't get you where you want to go. But the world, the culture, and this nation need some good trouble. Paul and Silas created good trouble for the Romans. The claim was that they were advocating customs that are not lawful for Romans to adopt or observe. They were messing with the ways the Romans did things. They were questioning the values of the culture. Mostly, I would suggest to you, they are taking on the gods of the Roman culture. And by the way, this is what people of authentic faith always do. The author of our psalm for today, as he looked around at the culture of his time, wrote, "All worshipers of images are put to shame, those who make their boast in worthless idols." People who make good trouble are the people who question the idols, the false gods of every time and place. And we need people. We need people who will mess with our idols, who will challenge us when we turn penultimate things into ultimate things, when we allow that which isn't that important to become too important. Money, as the story about the slave girl shows, has always been at the top of that list, as has power. Both run too many shows in our own time, and both need to be challenged as ultimate values. Our nation is dominated by money and the search for power far too often. Our political and religious systems are saturated with their pursuit. And people, especially vulnerable people, are often left behind as money and power lead the way. Yet it appears that money and power are not the only idols of our age. Chris Hayes, in a fascinating book I'd highly recommend it to you, titled Siren's Call, suggests that in our own time, attention, more so than money and power, attention has become the big idol and issue. In a culture dominated by entertainment and entertainment figures, by so-called influencers, by social media, attention is what so many of us are after, which is why narcissism reigns at this time, because we're busy wanting to get attention. We want it, and we will do everything we can to get it. And we need people who will bring good trouble to a land in a time like this, who will help us see how we are turning attention. And by the way, this is happening with our young people on social media a lot. We need people who will bring good trouble to a land that is preoccupied with attention, which is a false idol, a false god. Paul and Silas brought good trouble. And note, by the way, that this good trouble truly brought about good. A jailer who was threatening to commit suicide because he wasn't doing the good work he was supposed to do didn't kill himself. In fact, he was so taken by what had happened that he wanted Paul and Silas. He wanted what Paul and Silas seemed to have. And so he asked, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" Something is going on here that is big, he's saying. Yes, it's a little frightening. Earthquakes are quite unsettling. Without a doubt, the man may be a little fearful, which is why he's asking the question. But let's face the truth. Sometimes it is fear that shakes us into a new life. It is fear that causes us to ask, how can I have more of a real life? How can I be a part of something more than what the Romans are doing? And what did Paul and Silas do? They pointed him to the story of Jesus. Here, they were saying, is the something bigger. Here is the something more. Here is the true glory and power. Here is the love, as the Gospel of John indicates, that flows from God to Jesus and to the rest of all of us, unifying all. And the story tells us the man was immersed into that something more, into that love. And so was his whole household. The love that was and is bigger than all of the crazy false idols we create had brought good trouble to one of Rome's pawns. And salvation, healing, came to his whole household. Now, do you wonder if after all this the jailer went back to work at the jail? Or did he say, enough slavery, enough Roman power mongering, enough bad trouble. It's time for me to make some good trouble. I don't know. I'd like you to think about that. I don't know that for sure, but this I know for sure. It's time for you and me to make some good trouble. Good trouble that revels in the love of God, that unifies everything and everybody. Amen.